The desert wind carried a strange stillness that morning. Cameras were lined up, lights hung overhead, their glow fighting against the rising sun. Crew members whispered as if the air itself had turned sacred. Jonathan Roumie stood on the rough wooden beams of the cross, his costume heavy with the dust of the set. It was supposed to be just another day of filming The Chosen. Another scene, another line, but something felt different. No one spoke loudly. Even the director's usual barked instructions came softer, almost hesitant, like he didn't want to disturb something unseen hovering over them. Jonathan shifted his feet, trying to shake off the feeling crawling over his skin. He had played Jesus countless times before. He had delivered the lines. He had walked the dusty roads, touched the sick, calmed the storms, all on camera. But this scene, the crucifixion, it carried a weight that words couldn't hold. As the crew prepared, Jonathan glanced around. One makeup artist dabbed fake blood on his forehead. Another adjusted the ropes meant to tie his wrists. A production assistant handed the director a headset. Normal. Everything looked normal, but inside Jonathan's chest, his heart pounded in an uneven rhythm. He wasn't nervous about the acting. He wasn't worried about forgetting lines. It was something else. He couldn't name it yet. Places. The assistant director called. The crew scrambled, each person snapping into position like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Jonathan closed his eyes, and in that moment, it hit him, like a wave breaking against a fragile shore. This wasn't just a scene. This wasn't just a story from 2,000 years ago. This was the moment that changed everything in history. And here he was, standing in the middle of it, with cameras pointing at him, and yet feeling like he wasn't the center at all. His breath grew shallow. The wind seemed to hush even more, carrying a weight he couldn't describe. Rolling. Someone shouted. The camera's red light blinked. The director raised his hand. And, action. Jonathan lifted his eyes toward the hazy sky as the first line left his lips. But before the words fully formed, something happened. It started small, just a flicker of warmth in the air. Then, slowly, it grew. It wasn't the heat of the sun or the desert wind. It was different, like someone had stepped into the space with him. Someone he couldn't see but could feel in the marrow of his bones. Jonathan's throat tightened. His words faltered for half a beat before he pushed through, staying in character. But inside, everything was unraveling. The set, the cameras, the crew, they began to fade from his awareness. All he could feel was this presence. It wrapped around him, gentle, heavy, holy. The director called, "Cut." But Jonathan barely heard it. He kept his eyes on the horizon, his body trembling in a way he couldn't control. The crew shuffled, preparing for the next take. Someone asked him if he was okay. He nodded, but the truth was, he didn't know. Because in those few moments, something inside him shifted. It wasn't acting anymore. It wasn't pretend. As he stood on that cross, Jonathan felt like time itself had thinned, like the centuries between that day on Golgotha and this film set in Texas had folded in on themselves. Like he wasn't just playing Jesus. Like he was standing in the echo of the real thing. His pulse hammered. He thought about the real Jesus, the real crucifixion, the whip cracks, the jeering crowds, the nails biting into flesh. And suddenly, it wasn't lines from a script running through his mind. It was questions. Quiet, aching questions he didn't even know lived inside him. What did it feel like, Lord? Not just the pain of wood and nails, but the weight of the world's sin pressing down on your shoulders. How did you bear it? Why did you bear it, for us? The director's voice cut through the air. All right, reset, let's go again. The crew moved quickly, resetting props, checking lights. Jonathan barely moved. He couldn't shake the sense that the ground beneath his feet had turned sacred. The next take began, and this time, when he spoke the words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," his voice cracked, unplanned, raw. It wasn't in the script for him to cry here. But the tears came anyway. Because he felt it, not as an actor, not as Jonathan Roumie playing a role, but as a man standing in the shadow of the greatest sacrifice the world had ever known. The director called, "Cut." Again, silence. No one moved for a moment. Even the crew, usually so quick to jump into motion, stayed still. Because they had felt it too. Something had shifted in the air around them. Jonathan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He looked down at his hands, the fake blood drying against his skin. And in the quiet of his heart, he whispered, "Lord, was that you?" Asterisk. The wind answered with a gentle sweep across his face, carrying a strange peace with it. A peace that didn't belong to this film set, or this desert, or even this moment in time. It felt older than all of it. Bigger than all of it. Jonathan didn't tell anyone what he was feeling. Not yet. How could he? How do you explain something like that when you're not even sure you understand it yourself? But deep down, he knew. This scene was going to change him. Maybe forever. The next morning, Jonathan woke up before dawn. Sleep had come in fragments, each dream fading too quickly to catch. But the feeling, that same strange weight from the day before, hadn't left him. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like the answers might appear there. It was just a scene, he told himself again. Just acting. But it didn't feel like just acting. Asterisk. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cross. Not the wooden prop. Not the cameras. The real cross. The images came uninvited. Splintered wood digging into torn skin, a sky darkening midday, the sound of a crowd shifting between mockery and fear. He shook his head, trying to push it away. He needed coffee. Maybe that would clear it. But when he got to the set later that morning, the air felt the same as yesterday. Thick, heavy, expectant. Crew members joked softly as they adjusted equipment, but even their laughter felt muted. Like everyone sensed something different was happening here, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Jonathan climbed back onto the cross for another day of filming. The ropes tightened around his wrists again. The sun climbed higher. The director gave instructions, but Jonathan barely heard him. Because the moment they rolled cameras, it hit again, harder this time. That presence. Like someone standing just out of sight. Close enough to touch. Jonathan's chest tightened. He tried to focus on the lines, on the work, on anything else, but his heart kept pounding against his ribs like it wanted out. Finally, between takes, he climbed down and walked to the edge of the set, away from the noise. He leaned against a wooden post, breathing hard. "Hey," one of the crew members said, approaching carefully. "You okay?" Jonathan nodded quickly, too quickly, because what could he even say? That he felt like the ground beneath his feet had turned holy. That every time he spoke the words of Jesus, it felt less like acting and more like something, or someone, was speaking through him. He stayed quiet. Back on set, they reset for another take. Jonathan climbed back into place. The cameras rolled again, but this time, as he spoke the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" His voice cracked so hard it startled even him. Because in that moment, he didn't just say the line. He felt it. The abandonment, the weight, the aloneness of that hill 2,000 years ago. It ripped through him like a storm breaking open the sky. He heard one of the crew members sniffle. Another wiped their eyes. Even the director, usually so controlled, stood frozen for a beat before finally calling, "Cut." Silence again. Jonathan stayed there on the cross, trembling. Because it didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like a prayer he didn't mean to pray out loud. Later, during a break, someone handed him water. "Man," one of the camera operators said softly, "whatever you were tapping into back there, that was powerful." Jonathan tried to smile, but it came out weak. Because he didn't have an explanation. He only knew this. Something beyond acting was happening here. And it scared him a little. Not because it felt wrong. But because it felt so real. The sky turned strange that afternoon. Clouds moved in fast, swallowing the sun until everything on set looked tinted, like someone had dropped a filter over the day. Jonathan climbed the cross again, but this time his heart felt heavier than his body. He kept glancing at the horizon like something, or someone, might appear there. The director called for quiet. They were going for the big scene now. The final moments. Jonathan nodded slowly. The crew scrambled into place. And then, silence. The cameras started rolling. Jonathan lifted his head, sweat and dust clinging to his face, eyes locking on the empty sky. The wind picked up as he spoke the first words. My God, why have you forsaken me?" His voice cracked again, but this time, it didn't feel like his own. The words tore out of him like they'd been waiting centuries to be spoken again. As they left his mouth, something strange happened. The air changed. Every sound on set, the cameras, the shuffling crew, the distant traffic, seemed to vanish. Like the world itself was holding its breath. Jonathan didn't see the extras anymore. Didn't see the lights or the cameras or the director's frantic hand signals. Because suddenly, he wasn't on a film set. At least, it didn't feel like one. The cross beneath him felt heavier. The air smelled like sweat and iron and blood. And somewhere in the distance, a crowd, not actors, a real crowd, jeering, crying, praying. Jonathan blinked hard, but the images wouldn't leave. It was like two worlds had collided, reality and memory folding over each other until he didn't know where one ended and the other began. His heart hammered, he could hear his pulse in his ears. And then, a whisper, close, too close, not from the crew, not from anyone he could see. It came from everywhere. I was there. Jonathan froze. The words didn't come through his ears. They landed straight in his chest. Warm, steady, unmistakable. I was there, for you. His knees buckled against the wooden platform, but the ropes held him up. His throat tightened until the next words barely made it out. It was real, he whispered back, almost afraid of his own voice. Yes, that same voice. Calm, certain, like the kind of truth that doesn't ask permission before it takes root. The world around him blurred. He couldn't tell if he was crying or if the wind was just whipping sand into his eyes. But the weight he felt wasn't just wood and rope anymore. It was love, crushing, relentless, unyielding, and in that moment, Jonathan realized this wasn't just acting. Wasn't just cinema. He was standing in the echo of something far bigger than film. Something that had split history in half. Something alive, and it had just spoken to him. The director called, cut, but Jonathan didn't move. Couldn't, because even as the crew started clapping softly, the presence didn't leave. It stayed, close, heavy, holy, and Jonathan knew his life had just changed forever. The crew packed up slowly, talking in hushed voices. Jonathan stayed on the cross for a long moment, staring at the horizon. The wind had calmed. The sky was still heavy, but softer now, like whatever had passed through had left its mark and moved on. Finally, he climbed down. His legs shook. Someone handed him water. He didn't drink, didn't speak, he just kept looking at his own hands like they weren't his anymore. One of the crew whispered, "You okay, man?" Jonathan nodded, but his eyes told the truth. He was somewhere else entirely. Later, in his trailer, the noise of the set faded into the distance. He sat alone, head in his hands, and the memory replayed. The voice, the presence, the weight of that simple sentence, "I was there, for you." Asterisk. It rattled something loose inside him. Because deep down, he knew it wasn't just for him. Not just for Jonathan the actor. It was for Jonathan the human being. The son, the friend, the sinner. For every single person walking around carrying their own invisible crosses, thinking nobody sees them. And he couldn't shake the feeling that the same voice that spoke to him on that cross, had been speaking all along. Through his whole life, through everyone's life, he just hadn't been quiet enough to hear it until now. That night, Jonathan wrote it all down. Every detail, every feeling. He didn't plan on sharing it at first. It felt too raw, too sacred. But weeks later, when he finally spoke about it in an interview, the room went silent. People leaned in closer. Some had tears in their eyes before he even finished. Because it wasn't just a story about an actor on a set. It was about a God who doesn't stay distant. A God who climbs into the story himself. Who whispers into ordinary lives at unexpected moments. And who, sometimes, uses something as simple as a movie set, to remind the world he was there all along. When Jonathan's voice cracked at the end of that interview, nobody moved. The camera kept rolling, the silence felt holy, and maybe that's why, when the clip went online, millions watched it within days. Because deep down, everyone is waiting for the same thing Jonathan heard on that cross. That they're not forgotten, not abandoned, that he was there, for them too. The comment sections filled with strangers sharing their own stories. People who had never stepped inside a church. People who had given up on prayer. People who thought they were too far gone. All typing the same words over and over. I needed this. And maybe that was the real miracle. Not the moment on set. Not even the viral video. But the quiet way it spread. Through screens. Through hearts. Through ordinary days. A single whisper, echoing again and again. I was there, for you. Asterisk.